Lucas, or Luke, chapter 23. And the entire assembly of them, having risen up, led him to Pilate, and began to accuse him, saying, We found this one perverting the nation, and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Messiah, a sovereign. And Pilate asked him, saying, Are you the sovereign of the Yehudim? And he answered him, saying, You say it. And Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, I find no guilt in this man. But they were insisting, saying, He stirs up the people, teaching through all Yehuda, beginning from Galilee unto this place. And when Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were a Galilean. And when he learned that he was under the authority of Herodes, he sent him to Herodes, who was also in Jerusalem in those days. And seeing Yeshua, Herodes rejoiced greatly. For a long time he had wished to see him, because he had heard much about him, and was anticipating to see some miracle done by him, and was questioning him with many words. But he gave him no answer. And the chief priests and the scribes stood, accusing him intensely. And Herodes, with his soldiers, made light of him and mocked him, dressing him in a splendid robe, and sent him back to Pilate. And on that day, Pilate and Herodes became friends with each other. For before that they had been at enmity with each other. And Pilate, having called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, said to them, You brought this man to me as one who turns away the people. And look, I've examined him in your presence, and have found no guilt in this man regarding the charges which you make against him, and neither did Herodes, for I sent you back to him. And look, he's done none at all deserving death. Having disciplined him, then I shall release him, for he had to release one to them at the festival. And they cried out all together, saying, Away with this one, and release to us Barabbas. Barabbas had been thrown into prison for a certain uprising made in the city, and for murder. Wishing to release Yeshua, then, Pilate appealed to them again. But they were calling out, saying, Impale! Impale him! And when he said to them the third time, Why? What evil has he done? I find no reason for death in him. Having disciplined him then, I shall release him. But with loud voices they insisted, asking for him to be impaled. And the voices of these men and of the chief priests were prevailing. And Pilate pronounced sentence that what they asked should be done. And he released the one they asked for, who for uprising and murder had been thrown into prison. But he handed Yeshua over to their wishes. And as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Shimon, a Cyrenian, who was coming from the field, and they put the stake on him to bear it behind Yeshua. And a great number of the people were following him, and women who also were mourning and lamenting him. But Yeshua, turning to them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For look, days are coming in which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, and wombs that never bore, and the breasts which never nursed. Then they shall begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. Because if they do this to the green tree, what's going to be done to the dry tree? And two others, also evildoers, were led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to the place called Golgotha, they impaled him there, and the evildoers as well, one on the right, the other on the left. And Yeshua said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And they divided his garments and cast lots. And the people were standing looking on, and the rulers also were sneering with them, saying, He saved others, let him save himself if he's the Messiah, the chosen of Elohim. And the soldiers were mocking him too, coming and offering him sour wine and saying, If you're the sovereign of the Yehudim, save yourself. And there was also an inscription written over him in letters of Greek and Roman and Hebrew, saying, This is the sovereign of the Yehudim. And one of the evildoers who were hanged was speaking evil of him, saying, If you are the Messiah, save yourself and us. But the other responding rebuked him, saying, Do you not even fear Elohim, since you're under the same judgment? And we indeed rightly so, for we received the due reward of our deeds. But this one has done no wrong. And he said to Yeshua, Master, remember me when you come into your reign. And Yeshua said to him, Truly I say to you today, you shall be with me in paradise. And it was now about the 6th hour, and darkness came over all the land until the 9th hour. And the sun was darkened, and the veil of the dwelling place was torn in two, and crying out with a loud voice, Yeshua said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. And the captain, seeing what took place, praised Elohim, saying, Truly, this man was righteous. And when all the crowds who had gathered to that sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. And all those who knew him and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching this. And see, a man named Joseph, a council member, a good and righteous man, he was not agreeing with their counsel indeed. He was from Ramathaim, a city of the Yehudim, who himself was also waiting for the reign of Elohim. He, going to Pilate, asked for the body of Yeshua, and taking it down, he wrapped it in linen and laid it in a tomb hewn out of the rock where no one was yet laid. And it was preparation day, and the Sabbath was approaching. And the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. And having returned, they prepared spices and perfumes, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the command. John, or Yohanan, chapter 18. Having said these words, Yeshua went out with his taught ones beyond the Kidron torrent, where there was a garden into which he and his taught ones entered. And Yehuda, who delivered him up, also knew the place, because Yeshua often met there with his taught ones. Yehuda then, having received the company of soldiers and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Yeshua then, knowing all that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, Whom do you seek? They answered him, Yeshua of Nazareth. Yeshua said to them, I am. And Yehuda, who delivered him up, was also standing with them. When therefore he said to them, I am, they drew back and fell to the ground. Once more he asked them, Whom do you seek? And they said, Yeshua of Nazareth. Yeshua answered, I said to you that I am. If then you seek me, allow these to go, in order that the word might be filled which he spoke. Of those whom you have given me, I have lost none. Then Shimon Kepha, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. And the servant's name was Melech. Then Yeshua said to Kepha, Put your sword in the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my father has given me? Then the company of soldiers and the commander and the officers of the Yehudim seized Yeshua and bound him. And they led him away to Hanan first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was the one who gave counsel to the Yehudim that it was better that one man should die for the people. And Shimon Kepha followed Yeshua with another taught one, and that taught one was known to the high priest, and went with Yeshua into the courtyard of the high priest. But Kepha was standing outside at the door, so the other taught one, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door, and brought Kepha in. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Kepha, Are you also one of this man's taught ones? He said, I am not. And the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, because it was cold, and they warmed themselves, and Kepha was standing with them, warming himself. And the high priest asked Yeshua about his taught ones and his teaching. Yeshua answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in the congregation and in the set-apart place where the Yehudim always meet. I spoke no word in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who've heard me what I said to them. See, they know what I said. And when he had said this, one of the officers who stood by slapped Yeshua in the face, saying, Do you answer the high priest this way? Yeshua answered him, If I have spoken evilly, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Then Hanan sent him bound to the high priest Caiaphas. And Shimon Kepha was standing and warming himself. Then they said to him, Are you also one of his taught ones? He denied it and said, I am not. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the one whose ear Kepha cut off, said, Did I not see you in the garden with him? Then Kepha again denied it, and immediately a cock crowed. Then they led Yeshua from Caiaphas to the palace, and it was early, and they themselves did not go into the palace, lest they should be defiled, because they wanted to eat the Pesach. Pilate therefore came out to them and said, What accusation do you bring against this man? They answered and said to him, If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. Then Pilate said to him, You take him, and you judge him according to your law. The Yehudim said to him, It's not right for us to put anyone to death, in order that the word of Yeshua might be filled with which he spoke, signifying by what death he was about to die. Then Pilate went back into the palace and called Yeshua and said to him, Are you the sovereign of the Yehudim? Yeshua answered him, Do you say this from yourself, or did others talk to you about me? Pilate answered, Am I a Yehudi? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What did you do? Yeshua answered, My reign is not of this world. If my reign were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Yehudim. But now, my reign is not from here. Then Pilate said to him, You are a sovereign then. Yeshua answered, "You say it, because I am a sovereign. For this I was born, for this I've come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Yehudim and said to them, "I find no guilt in him. But you have a habit that I shall release someone to you at the Pesach. Do you wish then that I release to you the sovereign of the Yehudim?" Then they all shouted again, saying, "Not this one, but Barabbas." And Barabbas was a robber. Chapter 19. Then, therefore, Pilate took Yeshua and flogged him. And the soldiers plaited a crown of thorns and placed it on his head, and they put a purple robe on him, and came to him and said, "Greetings, sovereign of the Yehudim." And they slapped him in the face. And Pilate went outside again and said to them, "See, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no guilt in him." Then Yeshua came outside wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, "See the man?" So when the chief priests and officers saw him, they shouted, saying, "Impale! Impale!" Pilate said to them, "You take him and impale him, for I find no guilt in him." The Yehudim answered him, "We have a law, and according to our law he ought to die, for he has made himself the Son of Elohim." So when Pilate heard this word, he was more afraid. Went back into the palace and asked Yeshua, "Where are you from?" But Yeshua gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not speak to me? Do you not know that I possess authority to impale you, and I possess authority to release you?" Yeshua answered, "You would possess no authority against me if it were not given to you from above. Because of this, he who delivered me to you has greater sin." From then on, Pilate was seeking to release him, but the Yehudim shouted, saying, "If you release this one, you're not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a sovereign does speak against Caesar." Therefore, when Pilate heard those words, he brought Yeshua out and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was the preparation day of the Pesach week, and about the 6th hour. And he said to the Yehudim, "See your sovereign." But they shouted, "Away, away, impale him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I impale your sovereign?" The chief priests answered, "We have no sovereign except Caesar." At that time, then, he delivered him to them to be impaled, and they took Yeshua and led him away. And bearing his stake, he went to the so-called place of a skull, which is in Hebrew Golgotha, where they impaled him and two others with him, one on this side, one on that side, Yeshua in the middle. Pilate wrote a title too and put it on the stake. It was written, "Yeshua of Nazareth, the sovereign of the Yehudim." Many of the Yehudim therefore read this title, for the place where Yeshua was impaled was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, in Greek, and in Roman. So the chief priests of the Yehudim said to Pilate, "Do not write the sovereign of the Yehudim, but he said he's the sovereign of the Yehudim." Pilate answered, "What I've written, I've written." Then the soldiers, when they had impaled Yeshua, took his outer garments and made 4 parts, to each soldier a part. and the inner garment, but the inner garment was without a seam, woven from the top in one single piece. So they said, let us not tear that, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be, in order that the scripture might be filled, which says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. The soldiers therefore indeed did this, fulfilled this, and by the stake of Yeshua stood his mother and his mother's sister Miriam, the wife of Clophas, and Miriam from Magdala. Then Yeshua, seeing his mother and the taught one whom he loved standing by, he said to his mother, Woman, see your son. Then to the taught one he said, See your mother. And from that hour, that taught one took her to his own home. After this, Yeshua, knowing that all had been accomplished, in order that the scripture might be accomplished, said, I thirst. A bowl of sour wine stood there, and they filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on hyssop, and held it to his mouth. So when Yeshua took the sour wine, he said, It has been accomplished. And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. Therefore, since it was the preparation day, that the body should not remain on the stake on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high one, the Yehudim asked Pilate to have their legs broken and that they be taken away. Therefore the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who was impaled with him. But when they came to Yeshua and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and instantly blood and water came out. And he who has seen, has witnessed, and his witness is true, and he knows that he is speaking the truth in order that you might believe. For this took place in order for the scripture to be filled. Not one of his bones shall be broken. And again, another scripture says, They shall look on him whom they pierced. And after this, Joseph of Ramathaim, being a taught one of Yeshua, but secretly, for the fear of the Yehudim, he asked Pilate that he might take the body of Yeshua, and Pilate gave him permission. Therefore, he came and took the body of Yeshua. And Nakdimon, who at first came to Yeshua by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. Then they took the body of Yeshua and bound it in linen, wrapping with the spices, as was the habit of the Yehudim for burial. And at the place where he was impaled, there was a garden, and in the garden a fresh tomb in which no one had yet been laid. There, then, because of the preparation day of the Yehudim, they laid Yeshua, because the tomb was near.